Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmasvarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. I offer my humble pranams to most revered Swami Suhitanandaji Maharaj, most revered Swami Bhajanandaji Maharaj, and all the revered seniors and Swamis and Brahmacharis who are attending this program. And namaskars to all the others who are present here and attending this program. The topic of this talk is Swami Brahmananda, the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna. Now this title, the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, it was not given to Swami Brahmanandaji by any of his brother disciples, nor was it given to him by Sri Ramakrishna himself. It was given by the Divine Mother of the universe. She showed this to Sri Ramakrishna in a vision that this boy, his name was Rakhal that time. So Rakhal would be your spiritual son, your Manasaputra. So the real spiritual significance and implications of this title, of this relationship, the spiritual son, is perhaps only known to the Divine Mother herself and Sri Ramakrishna maybe. But if we study the life of Swami Brahmanandaji and his character, there are so many things we can see which seem to eminently justify this title, that he is the spiritual son indeed of Sri Ramakrishna. So we will discuss some of these aspects. The first, of course, is the relationship between Swami Brahmanandaji, or Raja Maharaj as we call him, with Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Brahmanandaji, Raja Maharaj, first visited Sri Ramakrishna in Dakshineshwar, and so during the last few years of Sri Ramakrishna's earthly existence in Dakshineshwar and then in Shyampakur and Kashipur, their relation was very much like that of a father and a son, or a mother and a son, at least a parent and a son. And that aspect of their relationship will be discussed in the next talk. So we will come to the next point. Another important aspect, a son usually inherits many of the traits of his father. He resembles his father in many ways. And when we see Swami Brahmanandaji, this was very much true. He really resembles Sri Ramakrishna in so many different ways. Of course, there was a physical resemblance also. Among all the direct disciples, he appeared somewhat like Sri Ramakrishna, his bearing, and it was told that from behind he looked exactly like Sri Ramakrishna. But that is, of course, only at a physical level. Now, in the level of his character and his behavior and so on, there are so many things that we can, so many points we can show where the character of Swami Brahmanandaji was similar to that of Sri Ramakrishna. We will discuss a few of those in the rest of this talk. When we hear or think about Sri Ramakrishna, the first thing that comes to mind is Samadhi. So he was a person who was known to people as a person who went into Samadhi several times in a day. The description was that he died and came back to life several times in a day. Now, of all the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, it was Raja Maharaj who, in a sense, carried forward this tradition. So in his later life, even when he was the president of the order for a long 20 years, even during that period when he was heading a big organization and even some cases dealing with administrative situations and so on, when then his mind was mostly indrawn and he often went into high spiritual states and samadhi. It was an ordinary thing for him. In fact, all the time his mind was indrawn, he had to struggle to bring it down to the ordinary level, and usually he did that by engaging himself in card games and fishing and so on. It is not that he was attached to these things. He was deeply attached to God, but to bring his mind down to our level, to speak with people, help them out, for that purpose he had to bring his mind down. So this is one prominent characteristic we see in the case of Swami Brahmanandaji as well. Now there is one related point which is true for both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Brahmanandaji. When Sri Ramakrishna came down from the plane of Samadhi and when he was dealing with people, dealing with the material world as it were, he was not absent-minded or disorganized in the way he was doing things. He was extremely meticulous, careful, precise in his actions. Every action was perfect. there is the situation, there is the incident where he had once, somebody had taken a knife, and when he was returning the knife to Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna told him not only where to keep the knife, but in which position to keep the knife, which way the sharp edge should be pointing, and to that level he was precise in his actions. And he expected his disciples also to be precise. When we look at Swami Brahmananda ji, the same thing was true, though for a person who was most of the time in Samadhi, he was aware of every intimate detail of what was going on in the order, about in each of the centers, how many cows are there, how many plants are there, how many fruits are borne by each tree. He had an interest in every one of these things, and he was aware of all these details. So we see that in their case, when they paid attention to something, they paid full attention to these things. Both Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Brahmananda ji, we can see that. So when we say Sri Ramakrishna was absent-minded, and similarly with Swami Brahmananda ji, when we say absent-mindedness, it is not the kind of absent-mindedness that we speak about, where where it is coming out of tamas. It is more of an absent-mindedness because the mind is fully attached to God. So when they are attached to some other thing, they are fully present-minded. That is one thing we see. Then there is yet another characteristic of Swami Brahmananda ji, which we see in common with Sri Ramakrishna, is that he never gave public discourses, lectures, and so on. He never went out for preaching in the usual sense of the term. Now, this is a very interesting point, because now Swami Brahmananda ji was considered the greatest disciple of Sri Ramakrishna apart from Swami Vivekananda. If we look at Swami Vivekananda, he was in a sense the antithesis, opposite of Sri Ramakrishna. He lectured in so many places, and he was well known for the power with which he lectured, how he convinced people who were of different temperaments to come to an agreement with, come to an understanding of Vedanta and live in tune with it. Now, in the case of Swami Brahmananda ji, we see very little of this kind of activity. Now, Swami Vivekananda once said about Sri Ramakrishna that this time the avatara's activity was mostly in the sattva plane. So we don't see so much of externally spectacular activities in his life. And yet there is tremendous activity which is not so obvious from outside, but it eventually brings to fruition many things in this world. And we can see that through Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, how great spiritual giants they were, and how the continuing activities of the Ramakrishna mission, which is only expanding even now, we see slowly the influence of Sri Ramakrishna, how it has spread in this world in so many ways. Now with Swami Brahmananda ji also, the same thing can be said to a certain extent. So unlike in Swami Vivekananda's case, where there was also a component of activity in the plane of intellectual activity and speeches and so on, in Swami Brahmananda ji's case, he hardly ever gave any speeches. There was maybe one recorded instance of a speech. And yet, in the order, he continually watched over and molded the order in its most crucial period, the first 20 years, when it was growing and facing lots of difficulties. And he found spiritual solutions to many problems, and made sure that the persons who were under his training became trained in such a way that they were capable of doing great work, great preaching work, and great service to the world later on. So while we may not see so much of external activity from Raja Maharaj himself, but we see from the effects of what he had done, what a tremendous influence he had. So this is the one similarity. And there's one last similarity I would discuss. Here, in the case of Swami Brahmananda ji, one aspect of his personality that we don't often see, but which is similar to Sri Ramakrishna, is that in Sri Ramakrishna's case, everybody would speak of him as a very simple and innocent person, like a child. Sri Ramakrishna was often described as a simple and innocent person, like a child. Now, in the case of Swami Brahmananda ji, often the descriptions we get is that he had a regal bearing and he was really the Raja, Maharaja, and everybody obeyed whatever he said, his command, and so on. So we get an impression that he was very different from Sri Ramakrishna, that he was a very dominating personality and so on. We may get this impression, at least superficially. But when we look carefully at his life, and when we look at the people who really knew him, write about him, then we see that this is very far from the truth. He was actually an extremely gentle and unassuming person. And even as the president of the order, he hardly ever exercised his will to make people do anything. He usually just gave gentle suggestions about things. But the reason why, of course, he had a regal bearing, no doubt, but the reason why people obeyed everything he said was that he was such a tremendously powerful spiritual personality, and he had so much love for everyone that even without his actively going and saying things to people, people could feel an elevation in his presence. People could feel his love. People could feel such a great personality who is raising their minds to a high level. So, for most of the people who came in contact with him, it was a great privilege to come and do something they can to help him, to serve him, to make him happy. So, without his consciously looking for anything, people would come and obey. So, every wish, gentle suggestion of his became a command automatically. It was a spontaneous thing, not his exertion of a power. So, we see this in his life. So, wherever he went, there was a celebration. It was not that he asked for a celebration to happen, but all the people would spontaneously come. They would be thirsting to get some chance to spend some time with him, and they would spend whatever they have to have the celebration, have a time with him, so that they can themselves get spiritually elevated. So this was really the power of Swami Brahmananda ji. And I would conclude by saying that this program that we are having today is also an example of this. Now it has been more than 100 years since he has given up his body, and yet we are all here to celebrate his life and his personality and what he has given all of us through his life. So let us all try to imbibe as much as possible the spirit of Swami Brahmananda ji and be blessed by this. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.